It was the year 2012 when Arcane Studios introduced us to the Dishonored franchise. It was a first-person action stealth game which provided the player with the freedom to tackle each of its large levels however they wished, with a major selling point being that you could beat the game without killing a single person. It was certainly an ambitious title, one which would earn itself high praise from critics and pave the way for 2 sequels. But more importantly, it set the standard for Arcane's game design. Since then, they've been making games which encourage players to experiment with the gameplay mechanics and push the boundaries of their level design. However, with the coming of the PS5, Arcane introduced us to their latest and most complex title to date, one which has been described as a murder puzzle by its game director. It's a game that combines elements of both the Dishonored franchise as well as 2017's Prey, giving the player a wide range of abilities that they could use to try to complete the game, while exploring a series of levels which will gradually change with every action you take in the game world. However, unlike their previous titles, this was a game with more of a focus on the combat than the stealth, while also maintaining Arcane's intricate world design. Yet with it borrowing so much from their other titles, does this game do enough to stand out on its own? Let's find out. This is Deathloop. Set in the 1960s, Deathloop takes place over the course of a single repeating day on the mysterious island of Black Reef. You play as Colt Van, a man of quick wit and with one hell of a trigger finger. After waking up hungover and alone on a beach with no memories of who he is and why he is there, Colt is left to explore the island only to be repeatedly killed by a mysterious woman named Juliana. It's only thanks to the help of alternate versions of himself that he begins to piece together what he must do to free himself of this place. Essentially, Colt is trapped in a time loop, and in order to escape, he must kill Black Reef's 8 visionaries. 8 people who hold power over Black Reef and could be anywhere on the island at any given time. Furthermore, if you can't kill them all before midnight, then all of Colt's progress will be reset as he's sent back in time to that same beach he initially woke up on. Complicating matters is the head of security, Juliana Blake, who warns the visionaries and their followers of Colt's plan to break the loop, basically setting the whole island and its inhabitants against him. Throughout the game, Juliana will taunt Colt for trying to break the loop, which often serves as both a good source of exposition and comedy for both characters.
Okay, class, what have you learned today?
Oh, you wanted me to answer?
I want to know if you figured out who you really are.
Oh, that's easy. I'm a drinker, occasionally a drunk, man about island. Everyone knows me, everyone hates me, handy with a gun, quick with a joke, I dress well, and why the fuck is everyone wearing a mask?
You forgot to mention your little hagama thingy. You'll get there.
It's a heck of a jig.
It doesn't take long for Colt to realize that unlike everyone else on the island, he can actually retain memories of each time loop, a skill which he shares with Juliana. This gives him a distinct advantage, allowing him to plan out his day and piece together the steps he needs to take in order to break the loop, all the while figuring out why he is here on the island, who Juliana is, and why she is relentlessly trying to stop him. It's basically Groundhog Day, but with a lot less soul-searching and a lot more murder. With every step you take, you'll often find messages left behind by your past selves, often serving as subtle hints towards what you need to do or giving you details about Colt's personal history regarding particular people and events. While every major discovery in game is followed by a pretty sick 2D style animation, giving the game's narrative more of an old-fashioned comic book look to it. These certainly do a good job of helping Deathloop stand out from the competition. But if you're expecting this game to comment on player agency and how gamers often approach violent titles like these, then you're going to be disappointed. Unlike Dishonored or Prey, Deathloop isn't interested in asking questions about the player's actions in the game. As a matter of fact, it seemingly relishes in the violence present in its narrative, as evidenced by Colt's dialogue and his lack of restraint towards his enemies. He and the people of Black Reef are clearly crazier than anyone could have realized. So as a whole, the game's story is pretty simple. While the time travel aspect does add some complexity to the narrative, it's ultimately the performance of our 2 leads that carries Deathloop's plot. The dynamic between Colt and Juliana feels like a genuine rivalry, which gradually becomes more complex as the game goes on, especially once you learn the origin of Juliana. Of course, if you're not happy with how the story is told, then I'm pretty confident that you'll enjoy Deathloop for its gameplay. Much like Arcane's previous games, Deathloop uses a combination of stealth, parkour, close quarters combat, guns, gadgets, and powers to move about the game world, with the levels themselves being large enough to offer the player plenty of options to approach a particular situation, while the enemies themselves are intelligent enough to pose a threat without being too difficult to ruin the experience. This is especially important due to how the game is set up. The entire structure of Deathloop is designed like an elaborate puzzle, one that the player needs to figure out how to solve in one perfect run after failing in multiple previous previous runs. There are 4 areas which Cult can explore in Deathloop, each of which can be explored at 4 different times: morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. Whichever area you choose to visit will stay at whatever time you arrive, and the day will only advance once you leave the area to travel somewhere else. Because of this, there's no way for you to save while you're in a chosen area. The only time the game preserves your progress is if you manage to leave an area before you die, which is easier said than done. However, I won't deny that the idea of exploring 4 different maps over and over again can sound quite tedious, but there's more to each level than you'd first expect. There are obvious differences during each time period, like changes in the lighting and the weather. Then there are also less obvious changes, like where guards patrol or what areas you can access. This is important in regards to the puzzle aspect of Deathloop's world design. Since Cold is trying to figure out how to kill 8 people in one day, a good portion of your gameplay will be spent exploring these vast environments, learning where his targets go, where you might be able to find new leads, and gradually piecing together when and where is the perfect time to strike each one. As a whole, snooping around these levels can be quite fun, especially once you unlock some of Colt's magical powers, but during the early game it can be quite frustrating since your movement options are severely limited. Fortunately, the game is forgiving enough to point you in the right direction without simply handing you the information you need. There's a lot of puzzles that need to be solved and conditions in the world that must be met before you'll find out everything you need to know about the 8 visionaries, which can result in you having to backtrack or visit a particularly difficult area a second time because you missed something. So it's best to make sure you found what you're looking for before continuing on. Thankfully, the developers were smart enough to provide the player with multiple ways to make each loop easier. For starters, you have a device which can hack mechanical objects in your environment, which is an effective way to cause a distraction, disable traps, or even turn an enemy's own turrets against them. But since the device has such a short range, you'll often have to measure the distance between yourself and whatever you're trying to hack before proceeding forward. The hack-a-majig is easily one of your best tools at your disposal, so it's best to use it whenever you can. Furthermore, unlike the rest of your gear, it won't disappear after every loop. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, once the day resets, everything Colt has on him will disappear. That is unless you've infused them beforehand. Infusion is a fancy way of saving your gear, so that whenever a day resets, you have all this gear waiting for you to use, rather than having to constantly retrace your steps to find a particular weapon or power you like. It saves you time and allows you to focus more on tracking your targets rather than finding new gear. However, in order to infuse your gear, you need residium, an element which is commonly found throughout your environment or by hunting your targets, but you can also earn it by sacrificing any of the weapons, trinkets, or powers you've acquired throughout a loop, which is particularly handy if you've managed to survive an entire loop and are preparing for the next one. More often, infusions can be the difference between life and death, especially since you lose all your residium once the day resets, so it's best to save what you can even if you have nothing of real value, especially since you're going to need some really good weapons in order to take down each of the visionaries. The gunplay in Deathloop is a vast improvement compared to Arcane's previous work. While the ranged weapons in Dishonored were treated more like an afterthought, here the gunplay is a major focus. A lot of work has clearly been done to make every weapon feel like it has weight and power behind every shot. From the shotguns to the pistols and even the machine guns, every weapon has its own benefits and disadvantages, which is expanded further by the tier system supplying every gun with a unique modifier. But for the top tier weapons, you'll need to complete a quest or meet certain conditions in the game world in order to find them. Yet you could easily complete the game without ever acquiring a legendary weapon. Deathloop gives you the freedom to decide how destructive you want Colt to be on his quest to kill the 8 visionaries, whether you want to try a quieter approach or simply go in guns blazing. There's a weapon for every occasion, and with the game's slick movement system you can easily evade enemy patrols, although the real fun with combat comes once you unlock your first slab. Like many of the most powerful weapons in the game, the powers you use in Deathloop can only be found by killing visionaries. However, unlike Dishonored, once you have these powers, then you won't have to worry too much about managing your power output, since your energy meter regenerates over time, meaning that so long as you don't overexert yourself, you can teleport around as much as you want. This slight change in the gameplay allows the player to focus less on resource management and more on how they'll approach their next combat encounter, which is hardly a surprise once you realize that most of the abilities in game are designed for combat. But what I would consider to be Colt's most vital ability would be his first one, and thankfully it doesn't use any of your energy meter. It's called Reprise, and it essentially serves as your life counter. Die 3 times in a row and the loop will reset. This effectively gives you 3 chances in a single level and makes up for the fact that you can't save in game. Furthermore, whenever you die, any residium you have on you will remain where you were killed. So unless you die for real, then you'll be able to reacquire all the residium you've earned up until that point. Plus, if you end up killing a target, then any of the lives you've lost will be replenished. So there's added incentive to hunt the visionaries aside from acquiring a new slab, and granted there are quite a few of them to find. Havoc increases your overall damage output while also reducing the damage you take from enemies. Carnesis allows you to throw people around around like a Jedi. Nexus effectively links the lives of people together, allowing you to kill multiple targets at once. Shift is basically Dishonored's blink, giving you the means to teleport short distances, while Ether is a stealth-orientated ability that allows you to turn invisible. So as a whole, there's plenty of variety in terms of what kind of abilities Cult has at his disposal, but since the player is given total control over which abilities to use and when, you're effectively left to decide for yourself which slabs would be best used against certain targets. Much like the guns, the developers have worked hard to balance out each of these abilities so they're not too overpowered, but when used correctly, they have the potential to transform Cult into a one-man army. The same could be said for the trinkets. These are essentially gameplay modifiers, capable of enhancing your weapons and character abilities or buffing your stats. You can find a wide variety of these, with the most powerful ones naturally being more difficult to acquire, but they all have the potential to drastically alter your gameplay, which is honestly the best way to describe Deathloop's gameplay. It's constantly changing, whether thanks to a weapon you found, a new power, or a random buff you've acquired. There's all kinds of neat little gameplay elements to be found throughout as you play. Hell, even the AI is full of surprises, like how a drunk enemy will take longer to spot you than a sober one, or if you start hacking something only to then break line of sight, you'll continue to hack the object even if you're not directly looking at it. Of course, with the game fully embracing the carnage one can create with all these weapons and abilities, don't be surprised if you find yourself with the urge to go on a massacre or two. I know I did. Sometimes it's just fun to shoot at some helpless fools.
Crazy son of a eagle.
Then again, if you don't want to spend your time mowing down AI opponents, then Deathloop also gives you the chance to hunt down other players as Juliana. Taking inspiration from the invasion mechanics commonly used in From Software's titles, Deathloop allows you to take on the role of the primary antagonist to thwart other players' attempts to break the loop, which, much like Dark Souls, can be quite frustrating if you're on the receiving end of an invasion, but I won't lie that being the invader is quite fun. It's made easier by the fact that gameplay-wise, playing as Juliana isn't much different from being Cult. The only real difference is in how certain gameplay elements are executed. For starters, Juliana can't keep any of the weapons or powers she picks up. Instead, with every invasion you unlock XP, so as you level up you also unlock new stuff to use, from weapons, powers, and even outfits for both Cult and Juliana to wear in-game. Furthermore, Juliana doesn't have reprise, meaning she only has one life. So if you die while invading someone, then you're dead permanently and will have to try hunting somebody else. To try and make up for this, the player is given a new power exclusive to her. It's called Masquerade and allows you to take on the appearance of any character in your environment. So if you're smart, you can use it to blend in with your surroundings and hide from your target. It really helps sell Juliana as more of a predator in comparison to Cult. Aside from that, there's not much else to Juliana. As a whole, the multiplayer is a fun inclusion, although it can be quite disrupting sometimes when you're playing as Cult only to be invaded by some random player. But that's kind of the point with this mechanic. Juliana isn't here to have fun, she wants to ruin your day. So even if you switch the game to offline mode, you'll still be attacked by Juliana at random intervals. She's effectively a mini-boss that will make its presence known to you one way or another. I suppose it just depends on if you want to deal with the AI or an actual human. Regardless, the invasion mechanic is yet another unpredictable element to consider when you play Deathloop, one that's complemented by some solid sound design. In such a fantastical setting, it's only natural that there would be a large blend of different sounds throughout Blackreef. From rushing water along the coastlines to the wind howling against the taller structures present in the game world. What few naturally created sounds that are present do a good job of setting the scene, but the real crown jewel of Deathloop's sound design is found in the player's weapons and abilities. Every slab has its own distinct effect to it, giving them all an unnatural tone fitting for a world like this, while the guns all resonate with every shot. From this it becomes evidently clear which weapons use more powerful ammo and which are deliberately designed for quieter encounters. It's rather surprising how much you can learn about a weapon based solely on its sound. Same could be said for Deathloop's music. If you've ever watched a spy movie like James Bond, then you'll enjoy Deathloop's soundtrack. It's a good mixture of 70s hard rock and classical tunes all blended into one chaotic frenzy of sound. The main combat theme alone is perfect for ramping up the tension present in the game world, while the location themes are tailor-made to set the tone for each individual part of Blackreef. The music is good enough that it doesn't detract from the overall experience, although sometimes I do wish that there were more cinematic moments in the game so that the developers could take advantage of these distinct melodies, but that's just a minor nitpick and it's easy to excuse. I only wish I could say the same for some of the character models. Utilizing Arcane's Void engine, Deathloop is able to retain a large sense of scale throughout each of its maps, allowing Blackreef to expand its boundaries far beyond what the player can actually reach, while also providing Cult and the other visionaries with plenty of detail. If only the vast majority of the NPCs were given the same amount of care. Many of them look look as though their textures have just been slapped onto them or that they've been covered in spray paint, which honestly is really bizarre when compared to how detailed the rest of the game world is. I suppose having the enemies wearing such bright colors would help them stand out against some of the darker environments, but still you'd think that the developers would work harder to make sure that their characters' textures wouldn't clash so much with their environment. Still, for the most part, Deathloop is a treat for the eyes, and I never tire of seeing all the detail Arcane puts into their games. Once again, Arcane has managed to deliver on its promise of a solid action game that encourages player exploration and experimentation. Although I won't lie, when I first heard about Deathloop's concept, that I had my doubts that the developers could pull something like this off. But after playing through this game, I can confidently say that this might be one of Arcane's best titles yet. It's without a doubt one of the PS5's most ambitious games. While it likely won't be for everyone, for those interested in breaking a time loop, they'll find no better game to do so than this one. It's got everything you could want: guns, humor, crazy powers, and a constantly changing world. What more could you ask for? Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I'm the Grave Tender, and thank you for joining me on the other side. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you all have a nice day.